want to welcome everyone to our webinar today entitled Pioneering Women in Ministry, a panel discussion. This is the second webinar in our two-part series hosted by MCUSA's Women in Leadership. I am your host, Lorraine Stutzman Amstutz, Denominational Minister for Peace and Justice for Mennonite Church USA. And tonight, I'm joined by Amy Zimbelman, Conference Minister for Mountain States Mennonite Conference, who conducted a study on women in MCUSA ministry with her research partner, Elizabeth Johnson. And she selected our panelists tonight as great examples of pioneering women in our denomination. So thank you, Amy. On the panel, we'll hear from Pastor Diane Garcia. Diane is based in San Antonio, Texas, and has worked as a camp director, a teacher, a gardening business owner before becoming a pastor. She was the church planter and serves as the current pastor of Roca de Refugio, a church with a nonprofit arm ministering to immigrants. Also joining us on the panel is Marilyn Miller. Marilyn is the first woman ordained to pastoral ministry in the General Conference Mennonite Church. She was the church planter of Boulder Mennonite and has served at the local level as a co-pastor as well as on conference and denominational staff. Welcome to all three of you. Tonight's gathering is in webinar format, so all attendees are muted, the chat's disabled. We will, however, be posting some links in the chat. Also, Spanish translation is available, and there is an interpretation globe at the bottom of your screen, kind of in the middle or to the right, that you can press for Spanish interpretation. We do welcome questions that you might have, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end. So please feel free to use the Q&A feature that's also at the bottom of the screen. Only the panelists will be able to see your questions. And we also had some pre-submitted questions that we'll also, as time allows, try to answer. So thank you for that. Let's start our time together in prayer. God, we come before you today with grateful hearts for the women who have answered the call to serve in ministry and for the path they have led and that they continue to lead within our congregations. Continue to grant them the wisdom, the grace, and the courage to serve. Help us to honor and respect their calling, recognizing the gifts and the skills they bring to each of us. Be with us tonight as we hear from each of the panelists some of their story. Amen.
Amen. Well, thanks, Lorraine. It is quite an honor to be here with Pastors Marilyn and Diane. I have a little bit of an introduction as well. So I believe that these women who show us the way are truly pioneers. They are doing something new when they really have no role models to look to. In Pastor Marilyn's case, she was the first to be ordained in one branch of what is now MCUSA, and she was also a church planter. And in Pastor Diane's case, she planted a new congregation because a group of people were saying, "We're calling you Pastora, please serve us." And she has been seeking support and structure while not sitting around waiting for every institution to check every box about her work. So these women remind me of, I'm going to go way back, Shira, who is the granddaughter of Joseph in the Bible. So she's this Egyptian and Jewish woman. You can see her here. And she is credited in First Chronicles with building not one, not two, but 3 entire cities. I learned about her from this collection of artwork of women in the Bible. You can kind of see those. We'll put a link to it in the chat. And a fellow woman in ministry gave those art depictions to me that are beautiful. And the last city that Shira built is actually, it was named Uzan Shira, which translates to listen to Shira. So can you imagine in Old Testament times how impressive this woman must have been for folks to name a city listen to Shira, right? And that's what the women who have gone before us do. They build structures, they build infrastructure so that future generations have a place, have a space. The next generation comes and maybe adds an addition to the house or paves the road out in front so there aren't as many potholes, right? And so in the tradition of Shira, I'm hoping that we can listen to Diane and listen to Marilyn and learn about the ministries they've been a part of building up through the years. I do want to really quickly, before we get started, note that neither of them was part of our original study on women in ministry, because apparently it's ethically questionable to guarantee confidentiality and then to ask to revoke that. So Marilyn and Diana are people that I know apart from the formal study, and I'm so grateful that we can listen to them tonight. So the first question I'm going to ask is basically, can you tell us your origin story, your call to ministry? How did each of you get into this type of work? And we can start with Marilyn. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
When I was a child, I just loved to play church. My sister Joy and I would line our younger siblings on the stairs, and then she'd lead them in singing, and then I would preach to them. It's a really good opportunity. One time when our siblings got tired of playing church with us, we went out into the hen house where the hens were all lined up on a roost, looked like a chorus risers. So Joy would lead the cackle choir, and then I'd preach to those chickens. A few days later, I heard my mother ask my father why the chickens were not laying as many eggs as usual. Well, that ended our chicken church services. So even as a child, I had a desire to be a pastor. One Sunday when I was around, I must have been 8 or 10 years old, our pastor said that the Mennonite church was in great need of pastors. He requested that the congregation pray that the hearts of young men would be touched so that they would become pastors. Well, I remember going out home, sitting out in the backyard and looking up at the sky and saying, God, if you need pastors so bad, why didn't you make me a man? I'd love to be a pastor. Now, I really didn't want to be a man, but I thought I just love to do the things that a pastor does. As I look back on my calling, I sense that one way God called me was through a deep desire to do pastoral work. A second way I sensed a call was through prayer. I'll always remember the day I went into our bedroom and I kneeled beside the bed and I prayed, God, when the children are all in school, I think I'd like to serve you part-time outside of home. I'll do anything, I'll go anywhere, if you just let me know your will. Well, the deep thought I received was, Marilyn, keep on doing what you're doing. And when I want you somewhere else, you'll know how to make that change. That evening, my husband walked into the house, and the first thing he said as he walked in was, Marilyn, how would you like to move to Denver? And I thought, oh my, this morning I said I'd go anywhere and I'd do anything. And the second thought I had was, oh, there's a seminary in Denver. Now, it would have been difficult to move had it not been for my prayer experience that morning. So as I look back, I sense that answers to prayer was a second way I sensed the call. And a third way I sensed the call was affirmations from others. We moved to Denver, and in my third year of seminary, the First Mennonite Church in Denver asked if I could do an interim pastorate. And then the church we were attending in Arvada invited me to be co-pastor there. Both of these invitations were an affirmation of a call to do ministry in a church setting. In summary, my call to ministry came, number one, through a love of pastoral work and a deep desire to do it. Second, a response to prayer after asking what God's will was for my life. And third, from affirmations from other people in churches.
Thanks, Marilyn. That was a lovely story. I actually grew up in a family that was actively opposed to religion. My mom was Roman Catholic. She immigrated here from Ecuador. And as part of her immigration journey and experience, really rejected the culture that she came from, and wanted me to very much believe that there was nothing beyond what I could see and touch in front of me. We never went to church. I never read the Bible. But I always felt, and I can remember in my earliest memories, feeling like there was something more. I remember I even used to pray, and I actually still haven't told my mom that I did this, but when I was a kid, I used to pray. Before I even knew what praying was, I just felt like there was something else out there. And so when I got to college, I explored different churches, even different religions, and nothing felt like it fit quite right. After college, I moved to Texas, and I started to attend a Mennonite church there that was on the border in Texas. And that was the first church that I loved. I just felt so at home there. The community felt right. It felt like I had finally found this missing piece of the puzzle, and everything kind of came together for me, everything that I was searching for. And even then, still, it was a long time before I would have called myself a Christian. I attended for about 10 years at that church. But every week that passed, every year that passed, I felt more and more convicted that that was really what where I was meant to be, what I wanted to be doing. And I think what that really unconventional experience has allowed me to do is to be more open to people who find and express their own spirituality in less conventional ways. I feel like I'm more open to the ways that God talks to us and calls us outside of the church setting, and through one another, or through nature, or whatever it is. I feel like that experience has led me to see that God is everywhere in our lives. But I fell in love with that church. I fell in love with the Bible when I started reading it, and fell in love eventually with the idea of serving in the church. I started as a volunteer and then just became more and more involved. And so when a pastoral position came up, I just jumped at that, and it has absolutely felt like the perfect sweater. It's just like, this is the best thing I can imagine. It's absolutely right, and I'm so grateful and blessed to be able to do it.
Well, thank you. Thanks to both of you. I'm going to keep exploring Diane's story and ask a question specifically to her. So, Diane, you have the gift of hospitality that is expressed in your vocation. You have this way of kind of putting your life on hold to make sure that someone else truly feels welcome. You've done that for me before. And this is true for anyone who could use a meal or a place to stay. And you seem to specialize in welcoming folks who are marginalized and may not have other places that are showing them welcome. And so I want to ask you about this gift. Tell us some of the work that you're up to in terms of hospitality, and what helps you have the courage to be so hospitable and open. Can you maybe give us some tips about what that looks like?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Thanks so much for that affirmation. I have definitely always been drawn to helping the most vulnerable. And when I came to San Antonio, I got to know the immigrant community and quickly realized that I wanted to really dedicate my life to supporting them. The immigrants arriving in San Antonio are really the most vulnerable people here. They often arrive with no external resources because of the way the system works. They often arrive with no money, no food, no clothes, no connections. And so it can be a really uphill struggle for them to find stability. And on top of that, the immigrants that arrive here are trying to navigate a new culture. They're trying to navigate a new language. They've often experienced traumas in their home countries or on their journeys. And the particular immigrants that I work with that are in our community are asylum seekers. So they're crossing the border and claiming that they're afraid to return to their home countries. That puts them in a sort of different, a special group where they're allowed to be in the country while their case is processed. But they don't, for a long time, often have a work permit. So they're not able to work formally. They don't have a driver's license, a social security number, a bank account. So they're arriving, starting from scratch in a brand new place where they don't know all the norms of the language. And the system doesn't yet allow them to kind of build independence on their own. So they need a lot of support, but in my experience, the immigrant families arriving here are also really ready to flourish. They have so much energy and hope and promise. They really want to make good and stable lives here. They want to be a part of a community, and they want to be able to give back to help others. So at the first church where I was an associate pastor here, I worked with the immigrant families that they served in the ministry. But I really realized that I wanted to not just be a part of sort of filling in gaps. I really wanted to be a part of revealing the strengths and resilience that these families were already coming with and creating a compassionate and empowering community where they had a voice, where they mattered, where they could really reach their full potential, a place where they could give back into that community, a place where they felt like they belonged. I think I myself have had a lot of different experiences, difficult experiences in my life. At times I've been rejected or marginalized, discriminated against, isolated. I've even been homeless for a time. I've had to navigate being uprooted also and becoming a part of a new culture. So when we're talking about hospitality, right, true hospitality means really putting ourselves in the position of the person that we're offering that hospitality to. And so I think all of those experiences in my life have helped me to see the people in my community as just like me, just my other me. And so I think that humanization is really key to providing hospitality. Even if you can't relate to the experiences of the people you're welcoming, if you haven't shared those experiences in some way, I still think it's really important to engage in that process of seeing yourself in them and seeing them in you, and to try to understand that there's no hierarchy here, that you're not better or worse, more deserving or less deserving, that we're all the same, we're all human beings and children of God. And I also think something that I work on a lot is a discipline of reminding myself that what I do have doesn't belong to me. Everything that I have belongs to God. And I'm just happen to be the conduit through which God is giving that grace into the world. So it's easy to get possessive about things or to feel like, well, I can't actually give that. But it's a discipline to remind ourselves that everything that we have is given to us through grace, and it's something that we can give to others, so that they also can receive that same grace. And I think sort of the secular version of that is also that the system has unfairly given privilege to some. And so when we offer hospitality, we can remember that we're not really doing something amazing. We're really just rebalancing what has been put out of balance to begin with. I think those things help me to be hospitable in a way that I hope comes across as abundantly generous, because we're provided with abundant generosity from God.
That'll preach. That will preach. Thank you. It was beautiful. And now I would like to play up the strengths of Marilyn. So you, Marilyn, I have observed, have the gift of encouragement, which sounds somewhat commonplace when you just hear encouragement. And yet I have seen people light up. I've seen people change under the spell of your words. You name specific gifts in folks, and it's like this creative act of giving life, of seeing someone for who they are. And it's incredibly powerful. So my question to you is, when did you first start encouraging others in such a powerful way? And how do you do it? Can you give us some tips about your gift that you share?
Well, thank you, Amy, for your kind words. You asked me when did I start? I think it was a gradual process, but it mainly happened after I became a pastor. Ephesians 4:11 states that a gift given to pastors is to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ. And I love 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Therefore, encourage one another and build up each other. According to these scriptures, we're to be builders, like Shira. Only we're building up people so they can build up the body of Christ. Now, what can help us do that? Well, when I consider how others have built me up, encouraged me, one way was by telling me the gifts they saw in me. I remember my father telling me he thought I had the gifts to be a missionary. And a school teacher wrote that I had the gifts of leadership, and she hoped I'd use this gift for the well-being of others. And my husband, Morris, he's certainly been my main encourager. Among other things, he encouraged me to go to seminary, plant a church, work for the denomination, and he took on extra work himself so I could do this. And I'm just eternally grateful to him. And then, Amy, you encouraged me by saying I have the gift of encouragement. Jesus encouraged others by his words. He told Peter he was a rock on which the church would be built. And one of my very favorite Bible stories is the story of the woman. She had the courage to go into a room full of people and pour perfume on the feet of Jesus, and others criticized her. But Jesus encouraged her. He said to those criticizers, "She has done what she could." What awesome words. Wouldn't you love Jesus to hear Jesus say that to you? She's done what she could, what she had the gifts to do. Jesus also said, she has loved much. She has loved much. Love, what an important gift to have and share. Poet Gibran talks about love made visible. The woman's love was made visible through her controversial actions. And while others criticized, Jesus encouraged her. He built her up with his words. And it just gives me joy when I see people build up others through their actions. A few Sundays ago, a young girl opened the door to the church for my husband and me. And it just made me happy to see a young person, just a little girl, welcoming us. And so I had to tell her so. Many of my words of encouragement come from a sense of gratitude and joy within myself for what this person is doing. And so I try not to just say good job, but rather say specifically what it is I enjoyed or appreciated, what gift I saw the person using. And I pray that my words may help to build up other people, to help them be what their Creator gifted them to be.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks to both of you for using your gifts to build up others and to build up the church. So I want to talk more about being a woman in ministry. The struggle is real. I want to name that. And Marilyn, starting in the 70s, could not have been easy. You both could have chosen easier lives, easier professions. So do any specific incidents or struggles stand out to you that you feel comfortable sharing with us?
Well, changes can be difficult. And I grew up having never seen a woman behind a pulpit. So I had to ask myself, is this right? Is it good? Am I worthy to give a message up there behind a pulpit? Doing any kind of ministry for the first time can result in questions and struggles. Once I asked a woman who's married to a church leader, I asked her to serve communion. After the worship service, I found her out in the hall weeping. She said she did not feel worthy to serve communion. And I thought, oh my, what has the church done to make this saintly woman feel like she's unworthy to be in church leadership? Practice some of those roles. It's sad, but it can be hard to do something you've never seen done before. Even my mother had difficulty with the thought of women pastors. The day of my ordination, we had a sharing time in the morning worship. Now, Mother got up and she said, I know Marilyn is going to be ordained this afternoon, and she has my blessing, but I believe the Bible teaches that a woman should stay at home and be a helpmeet to her husband. And that's what I've always done for Milo. She says, now, Marilyn has my blessing. I know she thinks differently, but I need to let you know where I am. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I need to let you know what I believe. Well, the church responded by clapping for her. And I just said, Mom, for a woman who doesn't believe in women preachers, you sure did a great job of it. You know, I'd like to be more like my mother and bravely say what I believe while listening to the contrasting beliefs from others and blessing them, not necessarily for their stance, but for being children of God, my brothers and sisters. I've not always done this well. When I was on a pastoral search committee in the congregation, a number of women told me they didn't think we should have a woman pastor. I was thankful that they felt free enough to share this with me. But in hindsight, I wish I would have taken more time to ask them what experiences they had that made them feel this way. And then I wish I would have shared more of my experiences. And I can become sad when I sense that I or others are being mistreated. If I'm feeling angry, it helps me to think of the story of Jonah. When he was sulking under a bush, God asked him, Jonah, do you well to be angry? And the Common English Bible states it this way, is your anger a good thing? If my anger leads to just brooding and sulking and feeling sorry for myself, that's not very healthy. But if my anger turns into energy for acting so as to make the situation better, then my anger can be a source of energy for good.
Wow. Thank you so much, Marilyn, for sharing that. I can't even imagine the amount of strength that you have. That's amazing. And listening to those stories, clearly we're in a different place today in some ways, but then also I think we're also not. It's been surprising to me the amount of discrimination that I faced as a woman. A lot of it now is much more subtle than the stories that Marilyn was telling. But it's still there. There are people who, when they call the church number and start talking to me, they ask if they can speak to the pastor. Or there's a lot of people who feel free to comment on what I'm wearing as a pastor. Within the community of the church, I would say that people are generally more affirming than I would have expected, or than people who talk to me about the church, that they're thinking everyone in the church comes from Latin American or African countries. And I think there's a general belief that traditionally people from those countries, men from those countries, hold more gendered norms. But actually, I have found that the church families are very accepting and very positive about me being the pastor of the church. And I suspect that that is because they're all immigrants. And so I think when you know what it's like to be told that you don't belong for something about your external identity, or when you know what it's like to be told that you're not good enough to qualify to meet someone else's bar, then you understand the importance of accepting people just as they are, without the other structures that our culture says we're supposed to place on top of people. So I started this church all by myself with very little outside support. And I'm actually the kind of person that loves support. So early on, I sought out a group of people that I hoped would help me learn how to plant a church. And there's a group in San Antonio called the San Antonio Church Planters Network. It was started by a couple of big churches here in the city. And their goal was to create more new churches in the city. And I remember the first meeting that I showed up at last summer, I just felt very out of place. I was the only female church planter and one of only a couple of people of color in a room of 100. But they seemed very excited when they heard about what I was doing, and they seemed to want to know more. And so later on, they announced that they were accepting applications for a year-long cohort for church planters. And I signed up, I sent in my application. That sounded really great to me. And a few weeks later, I got an email saying that actually they were going in a different direction, which I took to mean that they weren't going to do the cohort at all. But then a few weeks after that, they had another meeting where they invited everybody. And in the middle of the meeting, they announced with a lot of excitement and fanfare that this cohort was starting. And they were so excited about the people who had signed up. And then they asked everyone who had signed up to stand. And 10 men stood up, which sort of makes sense because I was the only female pastor in the room anyway. But then the person talking about the cohort said, we're so excited about these men, and kind of emphasized that word. And then he said, we really are grateful for their brides who are going to help them through this process, that they're going to support them and, take care of the family while they're doing this intensive program. And just in that moment, their worldview just was obvious to me. And it just sunk in that to them, women are brides and men are pastors. And that was probably the most overt experience that I've had. And the one that really affected me a lot, because I really want support. I really want to learn. I want to be in a group of people who are interested and excited about pastoring together and talking about it. But it became very clear that this group was not interested in helping me plant and lead a church. No matter how interesting the church sounded to them, there was a barrier there that I could not cross.
Thank you for being vulnerable, both of you. And I want to talk about another struggle in addition to what you both have named. That is one of the top struggles that women in ministry in our study said or talked about, which is finding balance between time and energy with their families and time and energy with their congregations. And this is for many reasons, but it's often more likely assumed that women will be the primary caregiver for children and aging parents. And women are, statistically, we found, more likely than men to be criticized for not conforming to gender stereotypes. So talk about how have you found balance in life, or is this an ongoing struggle for each of you?
Yeah, I would love to say that I figured it out, but definitely ongoing struggle for me. I certainly try to take time for myself and my family, but my family is sometimes even more stressful than pastoring. I have twins and they both have different types of special needs. So it's hard for me, I think, to find time to actually step back and take a breath. And I think one thing that I've learned in that is that it's okay to not do everything on my list. I just have to work at a slower pace. And this is, I think the sense of urgency that we feel is often a false urgency. And so I think we need to step back from that and say, it's okay. Things are going to happen at the pace that they're going to happen and that I can handle. And that's just how it's going to be. So I pare back the number of people that I will meet with in a week, the number of things that I can do, website tweaks or whatever it is. I pare back to try to make the space that I need for other things. And for me, even when I'm on vacation, it's hard with my children. And so I think just in a lot of ways, life is not perfect. And that's okay. But I will say, and this goes back to something Marilyn said earlier, I really only managed to do anything at all because of the people who have supported me, and especially my husband. I talked a little bit about people who have been dismissive, and that is certainly true. But there are, on the other side, also people who have really actively supported me, given time, energy, resources, words of encouragement, and I just couldn't have done anything that I've done without those people, which has really made me want to be that person for someone else, that encourager, also like what Marilyn was talking about. And I think what I've seen is that no matter who you are and what you do, you can make that difference for someone. You can be that person for someone who is facing difficulties, who's facing discrimination. You can sit down for a coffee with them. You can give what you can. You can open doors of opportunity for them, or even just send a text saying that you care. And I can tell you, being on the flip side of that those things really matter. They've really mattered to me. And understanding that has also helped me understand that what I'm doing isn't something that I'm doing at all. I'm really just a connector of all these people who want to support this community, and just sort of the person that's bringing them all together into one place, to support one another in this movement of love.
Wow, Diane, it's really awesome, all that you're doing. There's so many things I'd like to do, and it's an ongoing struggle to sense how to prioritize my time. Being 87 years old and moving much slower makes it even more difficult. And what helps me most is to have devotions in the morning and sense what's the best priority for the day. But I also want to be flexible and to feel free to break that priority when something more important comes up. I'm the happiest and feel less guilty about not living a perfectly balanced life when I can live in the present moment and be alive to the person or creation right around me. Irenaeus in the 2nd century stated, "The glory of God is a person who's fully alive." Fully alive. Being alive to family and church members, listening to them, learning from them, communing with them. That seems more important than just being sure I'm balancing my time perfectly between them. I don't think Jesus worried about balancing his time between family and ministry. Rather, he was alive to what was right around him in the present. The lilies of the field, Zacchaeus up in a tree. He took time to welcome little children who others were neglecting. As he walked along the road of life, Jesus was alive to the lame, the blind, the lepers, the poor. He didn't seem to be worried that he couldn't meet the needs of all those desiring his attention. He was alive to his own needs, his need of time for prayer, time to be alone with God. Although it's not always easy. Sorry about that. Although it's not always easy, rather than feeling guilty that I'm not giving enough time to church members or family, I'd like to be more alive to them in the moments I'm privileged to share with them. Another thing that can help us have more time, more balance in our lives is to graciously call out and receive the gifts of others. And Diane, you talked really eloquently about how you do this. I think, it's just wonderful when we can just humbly receive the gifts of others. I think too often we women think we always have to be the givers. And so I think one way to help us with our balance is, again, to remember we're Mennonites, believe in the priesthood of all believers. That can we allow others to be priests to us? And if we can, then our lives are going to be probably more balanced.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have one more question for this part, and then we'll do some Q&A from the audience. So Marilyn, when you were my formal mentor, when I was being licensed towards ordination, and I was crying on your shoulder about a struggle, you asked me this question and it stuck with me. You said, if Jesus were here, Amy, what do you think he would tell you in this moment? And so I want to ask each of you, if Jesus were here, what do you think he would say to the Mennonite church, and to women in particular?
Well, I tried to envision Jesus here talking to us. And in my vision, I saw him at a potluck. Jesus did love to eat with people and party with them. Maybe he was like a man new to our church who said that a Mennonite potluck is just a taste of heaven. In my vision, after eating, Jesus went to the front of the table and he took some time just to look at us. with those eyes that saw deeply right into our souls. He really, really looked at us, and he loved us. He loved us. And he would tell us that he would want us to grow in the love of God and the love of others. He would remind us of the two most important commandments: to love God and others as ourselves. And Jesus would tell us not just to talk about these commandments, but to do them. Make our love visible in our actions. And I think Jesus would commend the church for how we're doing this through recent Mennonite action events and through programs such as MCC. And I think he'd commend folks like Diane, who are bringing new life and well-being to immigrants. And Jesus would say that he hopes the Mennonite church will continue to be a model for peace and justice and building community. But I think he'd also say he's saddened to see how many people there are in the world who don't know his way to abundant life. And he would encourage us to share our faith more freely and invite others to experience a faith community such as so many of us enjoy. And I think Jesus would have a special message to the women present. And he'd tell us to fear not for what others might say about us or our ministry. He would encourage us to be builders, to use the gifts our Creator has given us to build up each other and the body of Christ. He would encourage us not to be afraid to be pioneers, persons who are the first among us to develop a new area of knowledge or activity. I think he'd be really happy. He'd really be happy to see what two pioneer women did in our church a couple of weeks ago. Amy here and Hannah Martin, our associate pastor, they planned a worship service in which children did all the leadership roles. A young girl with the gift of leadership, she was the worship leader. Two children asked adults to come forward and sit on the floor while they read a very provoking children's story. 3 kids, with preparation help from Amy, they preached the sermon. And then a young boy invited sharing from the congregation and then prayed. The children picked all the hymns for that morning that we sang, and I thought it was just delightful. Now, perhaps there were persons present who were uncomfortable with change, thinking, we've never done this before. But I believe that the children were built up as they received confidence and realized they had gifts that could bless others. And adults benefited by seeing the beauty of Isaiah 11:6. A little child shall lead them. In Ecclesiastes 3:3, we are told that there's a time to break down and a time to build up. In my vision, Jesus would tell us to break down walls and structures that keep the church from being relevant and helpful in faith formation and service, and would encourage us to not be afraid to build new ways that spiritually feed others. In closing, I would like to encourage you to see the current movie Cabrini. It's a true story of an Italian nun who is now known as the patron saint of immigrants. Cabrini had a strong calling to work with orphans and with suffering people. Well, the Pope sent her to New York to work with Italian immigrants who were at that time very looked down upon. And despite poor health and numerous obstacles, she was responsible for building orphanages and hospitals. When the Pope wouldn't fund some of her projects, she bravely marched into a meeting of men church leaders and she told them of the tremendous needs she was seeing. Cabrini's compassion, courage, and willingness to follow the way of Jesus, despite much criticism and abuse, really inspired me. So my hope and prayer for women is that we, like Cabrini, can be in touch with God's call and make love visible as we each use our own unique gifts to build up each other and to build up the body of Christ. Like Shira and Cabrini, we can be builders.
Thanks so much for that, Marilyn. When I think about what Jesus might say to the church or to women in the Mennonite denomination, the first thing that comes to mind for me is what Jesus said after he healed the man at the pool at Bethesda. He performs this miracle for a man that has been there for more than 30 years, all this time waiting by the healing waters, but never able to get in when the water stirred up. The crowd always goes in before him. And then Jesus comes to him and heals him. But then Jesus doesn't, give him a high five and walk away. He says to the healed man, now get up and walk, pick up your mat and go. And I just hear that as, stop sitting around now and do something. So I can look back and say, wow, I've been through a struggle. This has been really hard. But I can also see this incredible miracle right now that's happening through me, and the way goodness and love is multiplying in my church and in my family. And I think to myself, I can't stop here. I have to keep going. I have to get up and keep walking, even though I don't really know where I'm going or what's coming next. I think being healed is not enough. Being healed isn't a chance to take a vacation. When you've been transformed by the power of God's love, then you have to act differently. And so recognizing discrimination, having your eyes opened, having a good conversation, this discussion right here, those are things that are filled with the goodness and grace of God. But these are starting points, not an ending point. And so I hope we can all hold that question of, what do we do now? We get up and where do we walk to?
We can pass it off to Lorraine now for moderating some Q&A.
First of all, just thanks so much for your stories. I find them encouraging. I find them like a spiritual moment, just sitting in this space and listening to you share your experiences, your joys, your struggles. So thank you so much, because I think it's stories that we need to hear from one another, right? I mean, I think that's what's important about those connections that we feel when we hear that. So thank you so much. I know we don't have a lot of time, but there are a number of questions that came in, so we'll see what we can get to. One of the first ones is, what are ways you nurture your body and spirit to sustain yourself in ministry? You've spoken to that a little bit, even in the question, but anything, Marilyn and Diane, you want to add to that question?
Well, my body's nurtured by the image of 1 Corinthians 6:19, where we're told that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. And so to me, it's important to have a healthy diet and to exercise. And that really helps my body. And of course, having devotions, that really helps nurture my spirit. This book, 7 Sacred Pauses, Live Mindfully Through the Hours of the Day, is one I keep in my own silent place and just pick it up quite a few times to get inspiration. And important thing for me too is every Wednesday morning, my niece in California, who's a yoga instructor, she leads my 6 siblings and me in 30 minutes of yoga and 30 minutes of conversation and laughing. And I think laughing is so important to nurture our souls, to find friends and family to laugh with us. And so that time of exercising and laughing, it nurtures both my spirit and my body.
Yeah, and I think similarly to Marilyn, time for exercise is really important. I have non-negotiable time when I go to the gym, and I try to do as much walking as I can. I write, not the sermon. I write other things during the week, and those things are really vital and renewing. But also I think similar to, before we talked about letting go of perfection, I think I also make a practice of accepting that it's okay that it's hard. It's okay when you're doing meaningful things, they are hard. And I think we can also know that and accept that that's part of what we're going to experience through this gift of receiving transformative love and receiving grace.
Thank you both. We could have another whole webinar, Diane, just talking about that perfectionism and where that comes from and what we should be doing about that and the systemic issues associated with that. So thank you for both of you for that. Another question was around how you confront toxic hypermasculinity in ministerial contexts. That maybe we can, if you can respond to that and maybe touch on that along maybe a follow-up question that was around controlling a controlling lead pastor, how you dealt with that. So maybe some of that together, if you want to talk about that. Diane, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can. Unfortunately, I think this is an experience a lot of people have had in one way or another. And I think that a lot of the times that kind of behavior is given a pass still. It's either not recognized or it's ignored. I've heard multiple times, well, that's just the way he is, so you have to adapt. Or you have to be okay with this because he's the one in charge. He gets to make the decisions and act how he wants to act. And I think we have to actively stand up and say, no, this is not okay. We have to call it out, whether we're directly impacted or as a bystander. I think it's really important to speak out, connect with support systems, talk to people, let people know. And then accept with that there's a cost to doing that, when we do that, we may lose things and relationships that are important to us, but I think it's better than the alternative, which is turning a blind eye or being complicit in that kind of behavior.
Marilyn, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I'd just say that I feel blessed to live in a conference and section of the country where I very seldom heard a man express himself in toxic ways on this issue. In my early ministry, there was a time when the denomination was holding workshops all over the country about the role of women. And I attended one where the leader was a pastor. And he said he didn't think women should become pastors because they don't know how to confront. He said in the past week, he had to go to a home where a couple was having difficulties in their relationship and he had to confront them. And he didn't think women could do this. Well, I just spoke up and said, well, I'm a woman and I'm going to confront you right now. I said, I know women who do confront, but they tend to do it more kindly and gently than some men do. Now, it's not my nature to really confront people publicly, but I just really admire people like you, Diane, who speak out and say, it's not okay, because I think this really wakes up people. And I just think all of us have to find our own way to keep working on this, the way in our unique personalities we can confront.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. I think there's a question that came in that maybe I'm going to put to Amy, and asking about whether you perceive from your research that it is any easier or more acceptable for women to serve in lead pastoral roles now.
Yes, so I will ask on this one really quick. Crystal, do you have the graph? We have actual stats on this. While she's throwing that up. Yes, the most recent stats that we ran on this, here's the lovely chart. As you can see, it shows that men are almost twice as likely to serve in lead pastor roles, and women are almost twice as likely to serve in associate pastor roles. And so you can imagine with lead pastor roles, not only is the pay usually more, but the respect, the prestige varies between these types of roles. So considering that one of the speakers among us is the first person ordained in half of our denomination, essentially, we have come a long way to have so many women in these various pastoring roles, but we still have a ways to go. So that's kind of how I interpret that data, but those are percentages, as you can see. So, and I think since we are now out of time, I can take over from Lorraine for a second and give a closing ascending blessing and then pass it back to her. So I am so grateful that we could speak with, that we could listen to Pastors Marilyn and Diane this evening. Each one of you had, a vision in your mind of what could be, and you started building with the encouragement of your close community that knew you, but without the permission of everyone. In fact, without the permission of a lot of people. And that takes incredible courage. And so I pray a blessing over your ministries, past, present, and future. May your love house the people in your care. May your work continue to grow, guided by wisdom. May your courage move you and those around you from healing to getting up and walking and doing and building beautiful things. Amen.
Amen. Yes, thank you all so much for being with us. I also want to acknowledge that there were a couple of people who wanted to offer their thanks in the chat, sharing their story of how they've been impacted by Marilyn, you and Diane for your words. So thank you so much. I have no doubt we'll hear from others that same way. I also just want to put a plug in that for the latest news and events from MCUSA, you can subscribe to Piecemeal. I think the link is being put in the chat, which is MCUSA's weekly newsletter. And of course, supporting the ongoing work of women in leadership. I think that's also in the chat. We depend on contributions to do the work. And I think as we've heard tonight, we know how important and significant that work is. That's also how some of the research was funded that Amy and Elizabeth were able to do. And I think that is going to be so significant as we think about what that work looks like going forward. So again, thank you all for being with us tonight. Thank you all who were able to join. And if you have any questions or ongoing, anything you want us to pass on to those who presented, please feel free to let Amy or myself know, and we'll be happy to do that. So blessings, all of you. Thank you so much.